Good. Thank you for that reminder. Threw me off. Appreciate you.
Okay, so let me share my screen and we will talk about climate change and health. And specifically, I want to focus on the intersection between climate change and health and well-being for tribal communities. So, just again, briefly, I'm Shasta Gaughen, work for the Paula Band Mission Indians, and I'm the environmental director and the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. And I've been doing work on climate change with tribes for quite some time. And let me just get this into presentation mode. Okay, are you all seeing that okay? All right, awesome. So in part of my work at Paula, and I've been the environmental director for 15 years and have worked for the tribe for 20 years, I've been really fortunate to be able to work on a project that we call the Tribal Climate Health Project. And this is a grant funded project. We've gotten money from a variety of places over the years, first from EPA, and then when the Trump administration came in 2016, that money dried up, but we were able to get funding from the BIA, from the CDC, from the state of California in various ways. And what we do at the Tribal Climate Health Project is provide resources and trainings and community for people who are working with tribes to help mitigate and adapt to the effects of climate change. But the focus beyond the typical effects of climate change and the adaptation planning that we do for that is to integrate the health component into adaptation planning. Because for a lot of folks, they don't necessarily make that direct connection between the changes that we're seeing in our climate and our environment and how that can affect people's health, not just physically, but also emotionally and mentally. And then for tribal communities, it's community health as well. All of these things are integrated. So if you want to learn a little bit more about the Tribal Climate Health Project, you can see the URL there. It's tribalclimatehealth.org. But I want to jump a little bit into the ideas and the thoughts behind climate change. And in my experience, when you say climate change to people, and we know that there are some people who think that maybe it's not happening, or it's really not that big of a deal, or if it is, it's not really going to affect them. They hear climate change, they think melting ice, right? The glaciers are melting, but they're not melting that fast, and it's really not making that big of a difference. It doesn't matter to me because I don't live in the Arctic or wherever the melting ice may be. So they don't make that connection with how it can affect their lives. But when you're talking about tribes that are affected by melting ice, then you're talking about a lot of effects on people's ability to live in the ways that they have lived for generations, if not for millennia, in ways that might have changed in modern times, but are still based on the land and the places that they are from. So we're talking about things like a loss of hunting areas. If the ice is melting, then sometimes it's not possible to even access certain hunting areas because you used to use the river as your highway in the wintertime. Now you can't do that because the ice isn't thick enough, or maybe it doesn't actually stop the entire flow of the river. Or another example, there might be places where you have gone for hunting marine mammals or for fishing, but again, that melting ice means that those areas are no longer accessible. So it's not just about, oh no, the glaciers are disappearing. It's about our ability to feed our families and sustain our communities might be disappearing. Another thing that people commonly think of when they think of climate change is sea level rise. So yeah, the sea is going to get a little bit higher, and maybe that's an issue for people who live right near the coastline. I know one of you is joining us from Florida today. So yeah, it's an issue for Florida. It's not that it's not a big deal, but people tend to think of it in more of a geographical kind of a sense that, okay, the sea is going to be a little bit higher, so maybe the coastlines are going to change. For tribes, rising seas can possibly mean the relocation of entire villages. So whether you're talking about tribal communities in Alaska, but all the way down into the Pacific Northwest, and also into some of our coastal areas along the Gulf of Mexico, in Louisiana, along the coast of the Gulf Coast of Florida. These are places where relocations may have to occur. And in fact, there is a tribal community in Louisiana whose island is being basically pulled under the waves because of the encroaching effects of sea level rise caused by climate change. And of course, for those tribal folks who live in Alaska, they are definitely seeing this change happen in their villages where roads are being swamped, coastal areas are no longer accessible. And so that might mean you have to move an entire village. And that means taking people away from the places that they've always lived, where their ancestors lived and taught and may be buried, from the places where they have ceremonies and artworks and histories, and those things disappear. And that has a tremendous impact on social community health and also individual mental health. So sea level rise is not just about your favorite beach, maybe being a little bit further inland than it used to be. And of course, we have extreme weather, and many people are being affected by extreme weather. They might argue over whether the weather itself, the weather event itself, is caused by climate change, but we can say pretty definitively with the science that extreme weather events are becoming more frequent and they are becoming more severe as a consequence of climate change. Again, your typical person might think, well, maybe we're going to see tornadoes in places they didn't used to have them, or hurricanes in places they didn't used to have them. But what does it mean for tribes? Perhaps an extreme weather event means that you have to cancel a ceremony because the weather is too dangerous for it to occur. Or maybe there is, a tremendous snowstorm that buries a place that you need to get to at a certain time of year. Or maybe there isn't snow at all, and that snow is required for that particular ceremony or ritual to take place. So this is just one example of how extreme weather events can affect tribes and, as a consequence, affect tribal health and well-being. There's so many consequences of climate change, so I have a few more of these to go through. Here in California, in Southern California in particular, and in the Central Valley, drought is a big issue. And ever since I was a little girl, I've thought of drought being a California issue. I grew up in San Diego, and my dad used to use an egg timer to time my sister and me when we were taking showers, and he threatened to turn the water off if we were still in there when the egg timer dinged. And he actually did do it to my sister once, and I still remember her hollering, "Daddy, I still have shampoo in my hair." But we have drought as a consequence of where we live, but the drought is becoming worse. So, okay, drought, there's no water. But what about for tribes? It's not just a lack of water, it's impacts to things like traditional foods. Do we have the same plants growing? Somebody mentioned earlier the acorns and oak trees, and that's an issue here in Paula. Oak trees and acorns are very important traditional foods, but with drought, the acorns, there are fewer acorns. The trees, if they produce at all, don't produce very much, or the trees themselves may actually be dying off because of the effects of drought combined with other climate change impacts, such as extreme heat. So again, your standard person, well, it's getting hotter, so I need to worry more about, my own temperature and worrying about things like heat stroke and heat exhaustion. And of course, those are really important things to think about, plus higher energy bills for cooling your homes and that kind of thing. But for tribes, there's an effect on traditional species. Just one example of the effect of extreme heat. And again, the oak tree is a good example where perhaps the trees are dying or they're not producing because of a combination of drought and higher temperature. And again, this affects community health and well-being, because if you can't do these things, then what does that mean for you as a member of a tribe, that you are unable to access the same plants, the same animals, the same species, whether they're for food, for medicine, for ceremony, for making baskets. These things are all affected by the consequences of climate change, including drought and extreme heat. And then finally, one that we are oh so familiar with in California, but is becoming more and more common, not just throughout the West, but we see this happening in Canada. I think there are still wildfires burning in Canada as we speak. People hear about wildfire, and again, they might link it to climate change because you have the heat, you have the drought, So you're going to have the fires. And there are other reasons that fires have become as severe as they have because of fire management practices that turned out not to be ideal. And in fact, tribal cultural management, tribal land management has a much better impact on our ecology and helps minimize the effects of extreme wildfire because it thins fuels. So when we think of wildfire just as a general person, you think, well, okay, it's hot, things catch on fire. When you're a tribal person, you might think, hey, the ways that we used to do things to minimize fire aren't being done anymore. And because of that, those places that we used to protect, those places where we would use fire so we could encourage the growth of favorable plants, so that we could have, the hickory trees and the hazelnuts produce more than they otherwise would, so that the deer and the rabbits and the other animals that we might use for food, for hunting,
Right,
aren't
coffee
able to
time.
gather in those places as much. So those gathering areas are
I didn't even
destroyed.
tell him, but
And
you
that's
got
a
an
consequence of
allergy
wildfire.
appointment.
And Sammy, I think you might be unmuted.
Oh, I am so sorry. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh,
I do
goodness.
it all the time, no problem. So overall, when we're looking at the climate effects on tribes, we have stresses on physical health, emotional health, spiritual health, and our ability to cope, and community well-being. And these are things that happen to other folks in other communities as well. It's not limited just to tribal communities, but I have found in the work that I have done on this topic that it really does have a particular effect on tribal communities because all of these things are tied up with the land. And when the land is being affected, when the airs and the waters are being affected, then your community and therefore your own sense of emotional stability and well-being is being affected. So you can take these effects and you can put them into, at least three different categories of how they affect people's feelings about their place in the world and their identity, their values, and their traditions. And I have these quotes here that are essentially the things that people have told me about how they feel about the effects of climate change. Who are we if we lose our ancestral lands? If you have to relocate from your village, for example, or you can't stay in the places that your ancestors have always been, what does that mean if those places are unaccessible or inaccessible to you because of whether it's sea level rise or melting ice, whether it's because of destruction from wildfire, whether it's because the drought has become so severe that there's no longer access to drinking water, so you can't stay in these places? Identity is tied to land and place. So identity is affected by climate change. If you're unable to conduct ceremonies, if you can't gather the plants and the animals, then that has an effect on your values and it has an effect on your traditions. So if you can't do a ceremony, say the World Renewal Ceremony that happens, I believe that's a Yurok and Hupa, I think, do those ceremonies. Apologize if I'm getting that wrong. But I have a friend who's Diné, Navajo, and they have a ceremony where they welcome the first snow every year. But there have been years where there has been no snow. And so that affects a value. They're unable to do that traditional ceremony. And so it makes it harder to reinforce those values and traditions. And then if you're unable to hunt and gather, whether it's fishing for salmon, although I'm thrilled to hear about the Klamath River finally being undammed, and I understand that salmon are returning in greater numbers, so there are things we can do. That's an incredibly positive thing. But I have friends who live in the Great Lakes regions, and the tribes there are seeing their wild rice disappear. And, somebody said to me once, if I don't have wild rice, what does that mean? And for me as an Anishinaabe person, we have to have the wild rice, and it's endangered, it's threatened because of the changes that climate change are bringing to our lakes and our gathering areas. So this is a much greater effect. And these aren't the things that people generally think about when they think about climate change. So I think it's important for folks who work with tribes to understand that this is about more than just the physical effects on the land. This is about the cultures, the values, the identities of people And when those things are affected, you can't help but have your mental health be affected at the same time, whether it's individual or whether it's collectively. Now, the good thing is that tribes are resilient. Tribal nations and the individuals that belong to them have been through a lot in history since European colonization. And so that resilience, that ability to get through hard times has been tested over and over. So I suppose you could call that a silver lining, that tribes have built resilience. It's unfortunate that it had to be built under such horrific historic circumstances, and that it's being tested again with the circumstances of essentially, capitalist driven climate change. Our global system is such that we care more about the bottom line than we do about the survival of the planet. But that resilience being tested just shows that those strategies for survival are already in place. There's already cultures and traditions for tribal folks to fall back on. And of course, every tribe is unique, so they're all going to have their own cultures and traditions, but it's something to look to for support and to help maintain the tribe through difficult times. And the same is true of sharing and cooperating amongst tribal communities. And like I said, I've worked at Paula for 20 years. I may not be Indigenous myself, but I understand that there's politics and there's family squabbles and things that tend to filter out into the community. But when it comes to things getting hard, people share and they cooperate. They work together. They do what they need to do to make sure that the entire community's needs are met, even if they might have individual folks who may not get along that well. That spirit of sharing and cooperation survives. And then the ability to protect and heal your own community. Again, you can find that within the heart of individual communities and individual people within those communities. Ways to bring folks together, ways to reinforce values, whether it's things like being able to fish on the newly opened Klamath River or to participate in Great Lake restoration projects that I've seen in some of the tribes that I visited in the Great Lakes. I'm thinking of Fond du Lac specifically. They have a great demonstration where they've really been able to restore the wild rice in one of their traditional harvesting areas. And they are protecting and healing not just the land and the place where the rice grows, but they're protecting and healing their entire community through doing that. And then finally, communicating and listening. And these are just broad categories. Everybody can find their own place within these or add their own bullets to this list. But listening to and being there for one another in a community and giving a safe place for people to talk about what's happening is another way to strengthen resilience, to know that you're not alone, that everybody is working together and everybody is there to help one another through culture and tradition to maintain what you have and maintain that tribal resilience, even as climate change effects might be worsening. So I want to talk a little bit about some strategies for building on tribal resilience, and just making clear again that every single tribe is unique. And of course, every person within a tribe is unique. So what's going to work in one place may not work as well in others. And we strongly encourage, when we're doing this work with tribes, for them to, obviously, to tailor whatever strategies we have devised to their own communities and use their own values to inform them. Because what works in Paula might not be what works in, say, Colville or Warm Springs or, Yurok or Hoopa. Any of the 109 federally recognized tribes and many dozen non-federally recognized tribes in California are all absolutely unique. But what I want to point out here is that there is a different level of value for strategies that might work better in some places than others. And tribes are a place where self-care and informal community care really do form the base of the pyramid. So this is from the World Health Organization, this optimal mix of services for mental health. It doesn't sound very inviting when you put it that way. But the more you can rely on self-care and community care, the lower your costs will be, but also the better your reactions in the community will be if you're able to build that resilience by making the community stronger, by doing self-care, taking care of yourself first, and then taking care of your community second. It's a low cost intervention. And so that as a coping strategy, providing listening and healing and cooperation and sharing in communities, places where people can go to be heard and to know that they are not alone in their feelings about the effects of climate change. If they're feeling hopeless and sad, if they're feeling grief over the loss of lands and places, or certain plants and animals, then bringing the community together to support one another is one of the best things you can do, rather than have to get to the top of that pyramid, which is high cost, and that's long stay facilities and specialists. That's more of a Western model of support versus a community model of support, which is what we have at the base of this pyramid. So those coping strategies being invested in the community are probably the best way to help people manage those mental health effects. And of course, there are going to be some people who require individual care, but if the community is healthy, then generally you can find the ways to help the folks who need that individual support within the community. So building on that, so before we started recording, I know some people were talking about their pets. We were talking about cats and dogs. Well, I'm a cat person. So I decided to illustrate this last section of my talk with some cute kitties, but there's some dogs too. So dog lovers, don't despair. But this is a way to build on tribal resilience. And the number one thing is promote a sense of safety. So if people can feel like there is a safe place in their community, whether that's a safe place in their home, a safe place in, say, a tribal community building, a safe place with other people. So it doesn't have to be an actual place. It can be just being with other people that promotes that sense of safety. There are ways to build on a sense of safety so people do feel like they are kittens being hugged in their mother's arms. And by the way, I have 5 kittens at my house right now. If anybody needs a kitten, send me your address. I will mail you a kitten because I need to find homes for, for all of these kittens. But you promote that sense of safety. That's the stability that people need to feel like they are able to cope with the crisis of climate change. And then you want to promote calming. So we have this sweet little pug with his little lamb, or is that a pig? I think it's his little pig friend. We want to do that for people too. Give them a sense of calm. If there are people who are in charge, people who have their finger on the pulse of the community, who can tell people, hey, listen, we know things are bad, but we have this under control. You can be calm. We can help you. We can work with you to, say, make your own home safe from some of these climate change effects like extreme weather. Or we have a plan in the community that we are all implementing together to, say, relocate our village or to restore some of our gathering areas. That helps people feel a little bit more calm, gives them a safe place to be. So it goes together with that sense of safety, helping people establish and cultivate a sense of calmness for themselves and for their entire community. This is a huge one, promoting social connection. Now, unfortunately, we're living in a world right now where it's easier than ever to not be connected with the people around us, to be just hiding. Well, I'll say hiding because I feel like that's what I'm doing sometimes in my own house. I live alone, unless you count the cats. And I also have 3 chickens. But I don't have people in my house. So you need to have that social connection. Don't let people dive into their phones, or go down that internet rabbit hole, because having social connection is one of the most important things we can do to help promote mental health in the face of things like the climate crisis. If you feel alone, that's going to send people into a difficult place mentally. When you feel like you have a community that you're connected to, and that's one of the great strengths and resiliencies of tribal communities, is everybody belongs to it together. So there is a built-in sense of social connection, but that doesn't mean it doesn't need to be cultivated. Self and collective efficacy. So I love this picture of these two doggies cooperating to bring the giant stick to wherever it is that they're going. You're helping yourself because you have a stick, but you're helping your buddy because now you both have a stick. So that collective efficacy is really also key as a part of resilience and in helping people manage their mental health concerns and worries when it comes to climate change. And so if you are part of the community that is able to take the lead on climate change work, or if you're not, but you know that somebody is, that's something that you can ask people for their help with. What do you think we should do? Or how can we help you? How can we help protect your yard from floods that have now gotten worse because of increased rainfall in more severe storms? How can we work together as a community to clear fire breaks and brush, or to reintroduce cultural burning so that we can protect our community from the ravages of wildfire? You do it for yourself, but you do it together. You do it for your community. So these are all things that can be built into your climate adaptation plan when you're including health as an aspect of it. And then finally, hope. It was hard for me to find a cute kitty picture or a cute doggy picture that gave a sense of hope. So I just think this kitty is hoping that the kibble is never going to end. He's already got some on his plate. He's got more coming from the bowl. I just hope I get more kibble is basically what I think this kitty is saying. And we have to have hope. If we don't have hope that things are going to get better, then that makes it hard to do the things that we need to do to be prepared, to adapt. Because unfortunately, we've gone pretty far as climate change is concerned, where even if we were to stop releasing greenhouse gases today, it would still take decades for us to go back to where we were before, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and the use of fossil fuels. So adaptation is really, really important, but we have that hope that we can make a difference. We have that hope that we can protect our communities. We have that hope that there is a future for younger generations. And we have that hope that we will continue collectively, both as people individually, our families and friends and loved ones, and then our communities. And that's really, really true for tribal communities who have been together and, been a part of their places from the beginning of time and are still in those places and still have places to go, whatever their future may be. There's hope for it, to be in it together. And there's hope in being in spaces like this one now. Even if there aren't that many of us here right now, we know that we're just a few of the many, many people who are working on these issues and doing what we can to instill all of these things in the people that we work with. And for those who work with in the health industry, industry is kind of the wrong word for it, in the health space, how about that? You're probably meeting people who might be coming to you for their physical health, but the mental health issues are real. So I hope that in working for tribes, especially if you're a tribal member yourself, whether in the community you work with or somewhere else, this has resonated with you a little bit, and you can bring some of these things back to your communities or into the places where you work and be thinking about how to implement these strategies. Again, they're very broad, but you can tailor them to your specific circumstances or the place that you work and use them to give people that sense of hope, because that's really what they need to be able to, stabilize their own minds and say, I know I'm scared and I know things seem hopeless, but they're not, because I have somebody here who I know is working on this with me. And I have people in my community who are working on this, and we will get through it together. But none of this stuff can be done if you don't take care of yourself. So don't forget about yourself. Give each other some hugs. Do some self-hugging if that's what you need to do. Find yourself a kitten or a puppy or a person to hug, because this is hard work. It's really, really hard. And again, for those of you who are in the health space, you're probably dealing with things that, I never have to deal with in my work. I get to do the adaptation stuff, but I don't really have to talk to individuals and help them when they're feeling like they're in a place of crisis. But there are ways to make it happen. And I hope that I have helped provide you with some ideas on how to make that happen. And this is me. This is my contact information, and the presentation is going to be shared with all of you, and I think with other folks in your group who weren't able to make it today. So feel free to reach out to me anytime, and I'm happy to talk to any and all of you. And we have a few minutes left, so I'm going to stop sharing and see if folks have any questions or just want to chat. Thanks.